What is an integer? An integer is a whole number that is either positive, negative, or 0. So if I draw a number line just like this, and I say I'm going to start it at 0 right here in the middle, and we go to the right, you can get to 1, you can get to 2, you can get to 3, and 4, and this just continues forever, right? That's what this little arrow here means. It means we're just going to continue forever to the right. All these numbers are integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and also 0. And if you go to the left, if you go left by 1 from 0, you get to negative 1. If you go to the left again, you'll go to negative 2, and then negative 3, and then negative 4, and that also continues forever. So all of these numbers that I've written here, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, these numbers are all integers because they're all whole numbers that are either positive, negative, or 0. So these are all your integers, and of course they continue in both directions, right? So 5, 6, 7, 1,000, a million. If you go to the left, negative 100, negative 5,000. Those are all examples of integers. Now you might be asking yourself, what doesn't count as an integer? Well, let's say you have a number like right here between your 2 and your 3, and we'll say that number is 2.5 or 2.5 is another way to say that. That would not be an integer, right? That is not an integer because it is not a whole number. It can't be expressed as a whole number. Another example, you could come over here and say negative 0.5, right? The number between 0 and negative 1. Or you could write that as negative a half, right? That is not an integer, right? Those are not integers because they cannot be expressed as a whole number. So now that we know what integers are, what can we do with integers? Well, in the past when you've had whole numbers, you've learned how to add them, subtract them, multiply, divide, all that kind of stuff, right? So for example, if you wanted to add, 5 plus 3, we all know that that's equal to 8. If you do 6 plus 11, you know that's equal to 17. If you do 4 plus 1, that's equal to 5. These are all things that we've learned how to do in the past. And if you want to subtract, it's just as easy, right? You could do 5 minus 2 is equal to 3, right? 30 minus 6 is equal to 24, right? Pretty basic stuff, right? But what if you have something like 4 minus 7? These last two examples we did, we had a number subtracting a number that's smaller than the first number, right? Like 5 minus 2, 2 is smaller than 5. 30 minus 6, 6 is smaller than 30. So the number you get is always positive. But what if you get 4 minus 7? What is that equal to? Well, some of you might know the answer already. The answer is negative 3. And there are a couple different ways you can think about this to get your answer. One way is to think of it as a number line. So you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. And the reason I wrote it up to 4 is because 4 is our starting point, right? We start with 4. So let's say you're located here at 4. And then it says minus 7. So that means we're going to move to the left 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You get to negative 3. So negative 3 is your answer. It's 7 less than 4. 7 spaces to the left of 4 gets you to negative 3. That's one way to think about it, and hopefully that helps you make sense of the situation, helps you make sense of why the answer is negative 3. But doing that isn't really practical for every single question that you come across, right? You don't want to have to write this out every time you're given a question like this. So another thing that you could do is you could think of, okay, what's 7 minus 4? Well, we know 7 minus 4 is equal to 3. And so you notice this relationship between these two expressions here. 4 minus 7 is negative 3. 7 minus 4 is 3. So if you have a question like this, where the first number is smaller than the second number and you're subtracting, you could just think of it like they're reversed, right? So instead of 4 minus 7, just think of 7 minus 4. You know that answer is 3. And then you just change the sign. So instead of 3, you have negative 3 as an answer. That's another method that you could use. Another example of that would be if you had something like 4 minus 11. And I said, what is that equal to? Well, you could think of it this way. You could say, what's 11 minus 4? Well, 11 minus 4 is equal to 7. So 4 minus 11 must equal negative 7. And of course, it does. Now, what if I want to add numbers where maybe one of the numbers is a negative? So let's say I had 5 plus negative 2. Okay, how do I do this? Well, first off, let's talk about these brackets here, or these parentheses, you might call them, that I added here. Why are those there? Well, if I write 5 plus negative 2, it kind of becomes confusing. Like there's a plus here and a minus here. It's not really clear that this is one expression. We just use those parentheses or those brackets to help us stay organized. So 5 is a number, negative 2 is a number, right? Because it's all contained in those brackets, and we're adding them together. The plus is the sign in between the numbers. So that's just there to help us stay organized. So what does this mean? How can we actually solve this? What is this asking us? Well, what we have to recognize is that when you add a negative number, that's the equivalent of subtracting a number. So when I say plus minus 2, that's just like saying subtraction, right? It's just like saying minus. So 5 plus negative 2 is the same as saying 5 minus 2, which we know is 3. So let's do another one. What if I have something like 6 plus negative 8? What is this? Well, 6 plus negative 8. Remember what we said, a plus and a minus together make a minus, right? Or subtraction. So this is equal to 6 minus 8. So now we do 6 minus 8, and that's going to equal negative 2. Okay? So let's look at something else, because so far we've just added negative numbers. But what if I want to subtract a negative number? So what if I have something like 6 minus negative 2? Now I have two minus signs, or two negative signs, if you want to think of it that way. So before I had a plus and a minus, and they came together to make minus. Now I have minus a negative. See, same signs, right? Sometimes we call this minus, sometimes we call it subtract, sometimes we call it negative. They all kind of mean similar things, right? We use the same sign for all of those. If we have minus minus or minus negative, those two together are going to make up a plus. So these can combine to become a positive or a plus sign. Okay, so really what you have here is 6 plus 2, which is 8. Okay, let's do another one like this. So let's say I have 7 minus negative 3. Minus negative, those two together make a plus. So you have 7 plus 3, which is 10. Let's do something else now. What if I have, say, what if I want to add negative numbers? What if I want to say something like negative 5 plus negative 2? What's happening here? Well, the negative 5 is just minus 5. You don't really need these parentheses for that one. But then you have a plus minus. See, those are next to each other? So we're adding a negative number. That's just like subtracting a number, right? So saying plus negative 2 is the same as just saying minus 2. So now you have minus 5 minus 2. What's that? Well, that's minus 7, right? And if you need to think of, your number line to figure this out, so let's say you're at, here's 0, here's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, right? Minus 2 means you're going 2 to the left. 1, 2. That's going to get you at negative 7, right? Just like how positive 5 plus positive 2 would be positive 7, negative 5 minus 2 is negative 7. Okay? So if you want to practice using the number line, you can absolutely do that for the time being. Okay, let's move on to another type of question. What if I want to subtract two negative numbers? Like what if I have negative 6 minus negative 5? What in the world would I do here? Well, negative 6 is just negative 6, but then you have minus minus, right? Two negatives together, as we talked about, make a positive. So you get negative 6 plus 5. What's negative 6 plus 5? Well, that's the same as, 5 minus 6. That's just negative 1. Let's do one more. Let's say I had negative 4 minus negative 12, something like that. So you'd have minus 4 and then minus negative here. These two will work together to become a positive. So you get negative 4 plus 12. And what's negative 4 plus 12? Well, that's the same as 12 minus 4, right? Which is 8. Because we can change the order of this operation, right? Instead of saying minus 4 plus 12, you could say 12 minus 4. means the same thing. And so you get 8 as an answer. So with all this being said, we can come up with some rules, right? If you add a positive number, that just means you're adding the number, whatever it is, right? If you subtract a negative number, that also just means you're adding the number, whatever it is. If you subtract a positive number, well, that just means you're subtracting the number, whatever that number is. And if you're adding a negative number, that also means you're just subtracting whatever that number is. So this is kind of a summary of the rules that we just went over. So if you're adding a positive number, you just add that number. If you're subtracting a negative number, you also just add that number. So what you could say in general here is that if the signs are the same, like these first two cases, if you're adding a positive or subtracting a negative, all you're doing is adding, right? But if the signs are opposite, like these two or these two, see how these are opposite signs and these are opposite signs? When you combine those together, you get negatives. So that's the way I like to remember it, is that if they're the same, if the signs are the same, it just means positive, and if they're different, it means negative or subtraction, okay? So let's move on now to something a little bit more challenging maybe. So that was addition and subtraction. What if I want to talk about multiplication, right? Well, in the past we knew that if you do something like 4 times 3, that's equal to 12. Questions like that, they're pretty straightforward. We know how to multiply. But what if the two numbers aren't positive? Like in this example, we did a positive times a positive is a positive, and we never really questioned it beyond that. Well, what if I want to multiply a positive number like 4 by a negative number like negative 3? What do I get? Well, the number itself isn't going to change, right? 4 times 3 is 12, so it's still going to be a 12. The only thing that changes is the sign that's on the front. Is it a positive or is it a negative? So before we said, if you remember the rules up here, if the signs are the same, like these two, you get a positive, and if the signs are different, you get a negative. A very similar rule is at play here, where if I'm doing a positive number times a negative number, because those are different signs, my answer is going to be negative. So if I have something like negative 5 times positive 2, I'm going to get negative 10, because one's a negative, one's a positive. Now what if they're both negative, you might ask? Like what if I have negative 4 times negative 3? What do I get? Well, now the signs are the same, right? They're both negative. So if the signs are the same, your answer will be positive, so you get positive 12. So saying negative 4 times negative 3 is equal to 12, you get the same answer if you just did 4 times 3 is equal to 12. Now that's with multiplication. What about division? Well, what's nice is that with division, the rules are exactly the same. So if you have two positive numbers or two negatives, they're going to give you a positive answer. If you have signs that are different, positive and a negative or a negative and a positive, they're going to give you a negative answer. So let's do some examples. Let's say I have 6 divided by 2. Well, they're both positive, so 6 divided by 2, that's just 3, right? Nice and straightforward. But what if I have 6 divided by negative 2? Well, that one's a negative, that one's a positive. They're opposite signs, so my answer must be negative 3. What if I have negative 6 divided by 2? Well, this one's a negative, this one's a positive, so that also gives you negative 3. And what if I had negative 6 divided by negative 2? Well, the signs are the same, so you're going to get a positive answer, like positive 3. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's do one more. We'll write this next question in a little bit of a different way. Let's say you have negative 10 divided by 5, so we write it this way instead. Well, that's going to give you, 10 divided by 5 is 2. This is a negative, that's a positive, so together they make a negative. If you did 10 divided by negative 5, and I'll put that in a bracket just to show that the number is negative 5, same idea, right? Same numbers, 10 divided by 5, so your answer is 2, but this one's negative, this one's positive, so it's actually negative 2. So, in general, we can say that for multiplying and dividing, if the signs are the same, then your answer will be positive. And if the signs are different, then your answer will be negative. That's what you could say in general. So hopefully with all these rules that we've talked about, you're able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide all the integers. Let's talk about just one exception to these rules that we've covered, because at the beginning we said that integers are all the positive whole numbers, all the negative whole numbers, but also 0, right? Well, what do you do if you have 0? Well, we know that if we add 0 to a number, it doesn't change it, right? It stays the same. Or if you subtract 0, it also doesn't change your answer. It stays the same. If you did 0 minus 4, you get minus 4, right? That 0 doesn't affect anything. It's just you just have this minus 4. But what about when we're multiplying and dividing, right? Well, if you multiply a number by 0, like 12 times 0, any number times 0 is going to be 0. You do like 0 times 40. That's also equal to 0. Okay, great. If you do 0 divided by 2, that's equal to 0. If you do 0 divided by negative 17, that's also equal to 0. So 0 divided by any number is equal to 0. The only thing you can't do is you can't do something like 5 divided by 0 or negative 6 divided by 0. These are what we call undefined. So if you try to divide something by 0, you can't do it. If whether it's a positive 5, a negative 6, any number. If you try to take a number, divide by 0, it's going to be undefined. And some of the reasons for that, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because we know that when we divide, we're breaking numbers into groups. Like if I say 10 divided by 2, it means I'm splitting 10 into 2 groups, and I'm asking how many are in each group, right? So if you divide something into 0 groups, how can you divide? Like if I have 10 apples and I'm told to split into 2 groups, I know each group has 5 apples. But if you're told split that group of 10 apples into 0 groups, it's like, what does 0 groups look like? I know what 1 group looks like. It's just all the apples, right? I know what 10 groups looks like. 10 groups would be 10 individual apples. But to split it into 0 groups, what does that mean? Do the apples just disappear? Like what happens, right? We don't know. So it makes sense that when you divide a number by 0, it's undefined. Now you might be asking, what's 0 divided by 0 equal to? Because we know if you divide by 0, it's undefined, but 0 divided by a number we said up here was equal to 0, right? So what's 0 divided by 0? That's a question for another day, I think. But for now, if you see this, we'll treat it as being something that's undefined, something that we can't work with, but we will have a longer video on that subject in the future.